Good evening viewers and welcome to the Artlit review. Today we are going to discuss political economy of translation, and we will discuss various aspects of translation, aesthetic issues, technical issues, and translation as an industry as well. And to discuss all that, we have two very esteemed guests with us, Dr. Safir AWAN, who is Dean of Faculty of Arts and Humanities at National University of Modern Languages. He is a translator and critic as well. And our other next guest is Dr. UZMA ANSARI, who is assistant professor in National University of Modern Languages, and she is a PhD from University of Amsterdam. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Safir, we'll discuss many things and many aspects of translation, particularly literary translation. Its aesthetics, its technicalities, its political economy, its importance and cultural issues as well. But let's start with the very basic question. What do you understand by literary translations, and what are your observations in Pakistan about what's happening in the world of translations and literature?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I believe that translations are quite essential, vital for any nation in today's world, when we have been living in a globalized world, globalization of knowledge, globalization of cultures, that has also been happening for quite some time. In fact, historically, if we have a look, then we can say that translations have always been vital in transferring the cultures as well as the knowledge economy of different nations. Nations have been and countries have been benefiting from each other through the medium of translations. As far as literary translations are concerned, I believe that they are very important source to transfer a culture's, a nation's, a country's cultural capital to other locations. Most of the time, if we look at Pakistan, we have been on the receiving end of that cultural capital, on that cultural grid, you may say. We lie almost at the bottom, and that's why, in spite of our numerous responsibilities, we thought that we should try to bring the Pakistani cultural text, cultural production into the global limelight. So that's why I came into, you may say, this field a little bit late in my life, but now
it's never too late.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's it. So I think that we need to work in this field. As I said, that being on the receiving end of the cultural spectrum, we have been kind of importing foreign cultures through literary translations, but now we also need to do something to play our part in showing our culture to the world.
Dr. UZMA, Dr. Safir has just talked about cultural transfer and importing culture or exporting culture. Do you think it matters in today's globalized world, because we know a lot of things happening across the globe, and people know about us as well? What is that specific thing which you think can be transferred through only translations? Or can it be?
Yeah, thank you first of all for inviting me, and this really relevant question in today's time and space. Translations are very vital for the cultural growth of any civilization. And if we look at it historically, civilizations have grown based on the transference and the traveling of ideas, which has only been possible because of translations, when one text from one culture has been translated into another. So that means ideas are traveling to foreign cultures, cultures, and helps them grow, because cultures are organic entities. Now, it's important for a country like Pakistan in today's very globalized world, like Dr. Safi was saying, because Pakistan is a country that has been on the receiving end of ideas. We have been receiving ideas from the West in terms of translations, even just, Pakistan being a post-colonial culture, and now it's trying to kind of find its way into the identity politics of who we are. So in that context, translations would be important for us in order to translate our works, our productions of knowledge into the English language or other Western or foreign languages, because our stories, our narrative is often misrepresented through the media, which is often politicized, or it is, there's a political economy at work which filters out ideas of interest for the global buyers of these ideas. So for Pakistan, we need to be able to generate, first of all, ideas that are original, and then also be able to put them across as they are in their original form to the world at large. So that's why it's very important to translate our cultural productions.
Thank you very much. And you have raised a very interesting point. I mean, production of original ideas.
Yes.
So, Dr. Safi, would you tell what do we mean by original ideas, and what do we mean by transferring them? It's so much mixed understanding of things in present days.
Yeah.
So, can you just classify what's original here?
Yeah. As unfortunately we understand that our image abroad in the rest of the world is a kind of hard image as a nation, you may say. We are usually considered as people who are not very cultured or not very civilized because of, you may say, some international politics, but more than that, I think that it's because of us that we have a hard image in the world. While our soft image, which can be projected in the world through our cultural production, that has remained eclipsed, that has remained hidden from the world. So why I turn my attention towards translations, because I see that our culture and its various forms, various productions, art forms, they actually can represent us in the world. They can show our soft image also in the world. When I read and compare some of the Western texts with our local indigenous texts in our own languages, then I feel that we have a lot to show to the world. For example, history, history not only that started with 1947 officially, but history that was before in this region. And it's a very long history, perhaps longer than history in any other region, which dates back to thousands of years, many millennia. So there is something in that history, and the whole, mystery or mythistry, you may say, of this region, that should be conveyed, and that should be given some space on the cultural map of the world. So we have original ideas in terms of our indigenous cultures, our indigenous languages, indigenous ways of life, the way our people live, what is dubbed as microcultures. So where are our microcultures that we can flash through our culture production and through our literary production? So we need to show those ideas to the world.
Okay. Well, in that case, I would also ask one more very important question, that in this way you are limiting purpose of literature to project whatever image you want to project, whereas literature or art demands a freedom to explore human condition, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So that means our purpose of creating art is to promote certain kind of image rather than human condition, which may be very unpredictable, which may be just a surprise for us as well.
Yeah.
So don't you think it would limit the purpose of art and literature?
I believe that every art and its associated literary forms, they are rooted in the indigenous human condition. Human condition, of course, that can be discussed in terms of its universality also. But at the same time, for example, what is or what may be called human condition in our country, it may be different from the human condition in some advanced country. They have different kind of existentialist concerns.
Okay.
We have our own problems. So in that sense, no literature is divorced or deviated or separated from its local condition. What kind of problems we have been facing. For example, how many nations in the world were created out of this abortion of history, you may say, that happened during the partition, and then we came into being at that time. So how many people in the world, how many cultures, how many nations had to go through that kind of partition experience, that kind of migration experience, and the subsequent horrors of partition that we talk about. Not only that, in our political history also, there are so many things. As I always say that in our short history of around 75 years, some dates are very telling. One of them is, of course, 1947, then 1971, then 2011, and so on. All of these are turning points in our history. So they define and determine our human condition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. UZMA, I would ask the same question to you as well. And considering that you have particular interest in nomadology and transient identities, so what is your take on this issue?
Well, my interest in nomadologies, it stems from just movement, how mobility is so important for cultural growth. And so there are elements in every culture that you cannot restrict them. So when we talk about translations, transference, and traveling of ideas, in that sense, we need to think beyond our nationalized borders, for instance. That's interesting. And this is not just for creating an acceptable or palatable image of a country or a nation state, but just for just to create a fertile ground for knowledge production. Because knowledge production is of the essence for the enrichment of the human soul, and then the nation, the community. I think of it in those terms, not just creating a soft image, but also just for personal growth, for the growth of the community. And we need to think at a micro level, not at a national level only, but starting from the micro level, and then from there we move on to the bigger picture. Because ideas, they're the germination seeds of cultures, proper enriched cultures. And cultures are two types. One is from the developed world, they're more advanced cultures, they have a certain sophistication around them. And then the other definition of culture is that a system of shared ideas and beliefs. So which one do we want? So we have the former, we have a system of shared ideas and beliefs, but we want to let it evolve into something more sophisticated, more kind of aligned with our higher purposes, if you will. So I think of it in those terms, ideas.
Very interesting. And this is a very lengthy topic, and we can discuss on and on, but let's just come back to a few other aspects of translation. Do you think, Dr. Safir, translation is possible? It's very old discussion, and maybe people are just tired of listening about this. But it also tells us that if there are different cultures, certain nuances. So how can those be very easily translated into some other culture, other language? What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a classical question and a classical concern, you may say, in translation studies.
Yeah.
There is, two things. One is translation theory, and the other is translation practice.
Okay.
And of course, there is connection between these two. From the practices, we have come to understand the problems and theorizing the practices of translations. Translation is a very, very demanding field, you may say, very, very demanding practice also. I mean, when you actually go into the translation of a text and you try to transform it and transfer it from one medium to the other, from the mother text to the daughter text, for example, as they say, then you see that there are certain impossibilities in the process of translation. Whatever you do, how much you try to keep the essence of the original, for example. And in that sense, as a translator, I can say that there is nothing original. I mean, generally, we can say from the Bible and from T.S. Eliot that there is nothing new under the sun, generally. But at the same time, when you transfer and transform text from one language to another language, then that other text that you create in other language, that is not the same text. That is an altogether different work because of two things. Number one, the difference of medium, because every language has its own cultural baggage. And the second is the sensibility of the translator. I mean, yes, we consider this as an ideal, that the sensibilities and the sensitivities of the original writers and his or her text may be retained in the target text also. But there are certain limitations, like cultural limitations, like limitations of idiom, the currency that you use in the other language, that is altogether different. For example, when you say that कुत्ते जो है वो यूरोप में इसके किसी शहर में भौंक रहे थे या शेर ईस्ट के किसी जंगल में दौड़ रहा था, तो these are two different things. I mean, barking dogs in some western city and the roaring of the lion in some eastern jungle. So they generate different kind of images in the reader's mind. So you have to, and this thing, I mean, maybe we will discuss it later on also, that even when a writer is doing self-translation, for example, I'm aware of Abdullah Hussain, who translated his Udas Naslein as the very generations himself. Or Qurratul Ain also did
River
that.
of Fire,
River of Fire,
Fireflies in the Mist.
Yeah. So do we think that these two texts, translated, written by the writers themselves, are they the same text? No. When you, I mean, actually do a kind of critical reading of the Urdu and the English written by the writers themselves, even there you find so many practical difficulties due to the change of the medium.
Yeah. Well, many people say that when Qurratul Ain has translated River Aag Ka Darya into River of Fire, it was quite a different text. And what's your take on that? Because Dr. Safir has referred to examples where authors themselves translated their work of fiction, but there are other writers as well, like Garcia Marquez, Milan Kundera. They have supervised the text, whatever was being translated, and they showed satisfaction, I can say, for whatever reason. They were satisfied with their translation. Maybe they had origin in European culture as well. And maybe Orhan Pamuk also supervised his own works of fiction when they were being translated. So what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I would agree with you that because Milan Kundera and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and many other Latin American authors, South American authors, Orhan Pamuk, the famous Turkish author, they supervised their own translations, and they did show a degree of satisfaction with the final product. I guess, I mean, if you look into, for instance, Marquez or even Borges, Louis Borges's works, we do get a sense of the South American culture and its history from their works, because we are familiar with their political context, the history, the culture, if we are avid readers of those works. And since translating a Western language like Spanish into English would be much more easy, it would be easier, because both have a Latin base, right, linguistically. And then for Orhan Pamuk's Turkish, that would also have sort of a Latin base, because much of the modern Turkish, after the creation of the Turkish Republic, it was a completely new language as compared to Ottoman Turkish, and it was much more westernized and therefore more embedded or based in a Western world view.
Okay.
So in those terms, I guess they would have been satisfied with those translations. And since we also live in a globalized world, many people are familiar through media or through, you know, traveling has become really easy now for people. They're familiar with those Western contexts. But to translate a work of Urdu into English would be more difficult, I would say, because the idiom of Urdu is much more difficult to translate into a Latin-based or Francophone or Anglophonic language, because our idiom is very rich, very complex, the Urdu alone, because it has lexical terminology from Persian, Farsi, from Arabic, from Sanskrit, from, you know, there's so much going on in just this one language system. So the complexity and the richness of our language, I think we should appreciate that, and I think those translations require a lot of care, just in those terms. Yeah, this is what I would say.
Very interesting. And there are some works of fiction in Urdu which have been translated into English, but we'll come to that later.
Yes.
Dr. Safir has also done
Yeah,
a very good translation.
in fact,
yeah.
if you don't mind me asking, you also translated Marquez's works into Urdu,
Yeah,
and you translated Kundera into Urdu as well.
yeah.
So as a translator, you would be familiar with the, you know, the shift that takes place from a Latin-based language to an Arabic or Persian-based language.
Yeah, well, when I was doing that translation, I was not that academic at that time, not even now. It was just labor of love and passion, and I was so much inspired by these works that I just wanted to translate. I can never do it again.
Okay.
It was too demanding. I used to enjoy it as well, and then there were many times that certain sentences I used to just stop over there. I could not move on. So when I was translating that, I was very young and very passionate, and I just did it. It was just labor of love, basically. So I didn't think much about that. But I did a hard work, a lot of dictionaries and consulting with people, getting reviewed by others. So I did all that.
So translation is also like a creative process, which is so exhausting.
I think it should not be considered as a creative process, because that, in my view, people have a disagreement with me. I think it's basically the creator's property. And all we have is a text, not even created at that time. So I try to understand text, and whatever loyalty is possible, I try to do that. I do not want to deviate unless it's just compulsory, because I think it's a kind of his work which I am translating. So I should not create it. I should not transcreate the things. Many people have also criticism on the works of, on the translation of River of Fire, because they think Kurutalan has tried to recreate that, because it was her own thing. She had the liberty to do whatever she wanted. So there was a lot of editing she did. People say it. I am not. I can't say it with authority, but there was also an objection on that as well. But we'll come to that later. So, what do you think? Should we be loyal to the literal translation, literal text?
Loyalty is not possible in translation.
Okay.
Yeah. There is a lot of creative intervention that you have to do and you have to create. I mean, just keeping, for example, the names of the characters from the original, or some storyline from the original into the target translation text. That is not enough to say that it is based totally on the original. For example, when I was translating, then the opening paragraph is about a bird hovering somewhere above on a sea of sand, and Tarad has created a certain ambience which we can relate with because we belong to this part of the world where we see such deserts, for example, or where we see droughts and where there is, for example, water crisis and so on. So when I try to capture that spirit into English, I faced a lot of issues, and I had to compromise on whatever scene he was trying to create. So in that sense, I believe that you have to sometimes kill the original author in order to make it new and revive that text into a different medium. And this is the reason that when he read Sorrows of Sarsawati, then he told me that it's not my work.
So you took it as compliment, or?
Yes, I was proud of it. That okay.
You didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
Now you had completed his work. So
Yeah.
do you have to say something about the same issue we are discussing?
Yeah, so there are these two schools of thought. That one would be that translation is a creative process, and one would be that it's not. I think it is a creative process. I belong to that school of thought but I also don't believe in the death of the author. I believe that the author is very important, and the author is kind of this authoritarian figure who is, I don't know if I should say this, kind of like godlike. He's the one who created those ideas, those seeds, and then you translate those into your culture, your language. So it's like there's this famous critical thinker, Walter Benjamin, and he wrote an essay called The Task of the Translator, and he was of the opinion that a language in itself, even original language, is actually a translation of the godlike language, which has no sound. It is just the language of things. So the process of naming, which is this biblical narrative of, first all the things were named, that was the first creation of language. That creation of language was actually an act of translation, because those things were there as concepts in our mind, in the human mind. So those concepts were then came into this audio or oral form, and they were, phonetically, let's say, translated into being, right? So in those terms, I would say every language or every kind of verbalization of abstract concepts, too academic, but verbalization of abstract concepts is a translation in that sense.
Okay.
So it's a creative process as well.
Well, that's very important discussion, Dr. Uzma, but this is a time for a short break. We'll just come back. Viewers, stay with us. Welcome back, viewers. Dr. Safi, you just heard Dr. Uzma's views. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would like to take a respectful, departure from that. I believe that creative interventions are required in translations. Also, maybe because of my academic background, you may say, I have always been inspired from this post-structuralist thought of Jacques Derrida, and I think that even as a reader, when you read a work of literature or analyze a work of art, then you as a reader even makes it a different kind of text through your own interpretation, through your own intervention, and even interpretive interpretation, interpretive intervention makes it a different work than the original. So this view that rather this tendency of logocentrism, as they say, in language and its applications and its interpretations, I don't stand with that, and I feel that even in translations we make it a different work. Of course, not altogether. The names of characters and the storyline, basic storyline, that stays the same, but there is a lot more involved in the process of this kind of transformation. It also reminds me of various semantic layers around the word translation. When we consult the dictionary meaning of the word, then it's not one or two layers of meanings. In fact, there are multiple layers. Around 7 different layers of meanings are there around the word translation, and the last one is death. So it means that you kind of, when you transfer one thing into the other, from one form into another, then it is completely changed and it is transformed, and it then re-emerges from the ashes and it becomes something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, very interesting discussion, but I would also like to ask Dr. Uzma, isn't it only text important which is in front of us, which is a reality? Whatever author was thinking, we don't know. We don't know author's brain, what's going on in his or her mind. What we have is text in front of us, and we have to understand if we belong to the same language, or we have to understand its translation if we speak a different language. So what do you think about this?
Yes.
And sorry to, it's also important to understand the role of a reader.
Yes.
How does a reader understand, even if he or she belongs to the same language or they have a different language?
Yeah. That is after the postmodernist turn and the post-structuralist turn in the 20th century that Dr. Safir is taking inspiration from. There is a great degree of credibility in that movement, which says that the text has autonomy, which is not given to it by the author. So it's kind of disconnected with the author, and the author's authority kind of ends after the completion of the text, after the final product. And the text is free to be interpreted in any way that the reader wants to interpret it, which is part of the reader reception theory, that the reader has the ultimate say in how to interpret a given text. I do agree with that, but I'm a bit, I'm kind of a bit in a gray area intellectually, because I come from, like, my school of thought initially was the Frankfurt School, which is more structuralist, not post-structuralist. So I'm not really 100% logocentric, but I believe that structure is important. It has a context, and the author's contribution is, if not central or essential to the text, but it does influence the text to a certain degree. And I always say that the author should never be ignored completely and should never be apoliticized. And politicizing an author means that not, kind of attributing any kind of political ideology to the author, but just considering the historical, cultural, social context of the author in contributing to the soil which generates the plant, which is the text. Because with I mean, if you think of a text as a plant or a tree, you need to think of the environment in those terms, that the water that the earth is receiving, the climate that the earth, that piece of land is in, and the seed which then germinates into a tree or a plant. So I kind of view it in a more organic way. So my approach lately has become more organic in that sense. And so therefore I never completely dissociate the author from the text.
Okay.
But many liberal, post-structuralist and leftist academics, they actually, even they don't really completely apoliticize the author, but they do. I mean, if we just look at the text as a work of art, they have a tendency, generally internationally, the work of art has a lot of autonomy. So I think it's a question of autonomy. Do you want to see the autonomy in the text, or do you want to take it away from the text? I don't want to take away the autonomy of the text. I think that would be unfair. But I mean, if you have a text coming from an author like Mustansir Hussain Tarar, who writes exceptionally, who has written exceptional works of fiction in Urdu language, which is a rich language, and then you translate his works, the translation would be creative work. It would be part of a creative process. But the idea that came from Mustansir Hussain Tarar, who is from Pakistan, who has a certain history, because Pakistan has a certain history, it has a certain geopolitical, regional, cultural background. You can't detach that from that work. This is how I see it.
There are some other translations as well, like Khalid Hassan has translated Sadasan Manto. I think it's quite good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another translation of Mizatar Beg's novel has also been done by
Yeah.
someone. It's
Yeah.
also very interesting. So any comments about that?
Yes, of course.
And Chaki Wada Mein Visal by Muhammad Khalid Akhtar, that has also been, I think, has been
that
translated.
has been also translated.
Someone has translated Shah Hussein's copies as well into English, and
Yeah.
those are quite good as well.
Yeah. There are many translations, in
Yeah.
fact, poetic translations of Ghalib, for example,
Right.
Iqbal and Faraz, and even autobiographies like Kishwar Nahi's Buri Aurat Ki Katha and so on. So not that this is something new. Of course, people have been around and they have been translating. But my point is a little different, that we live in the era of a global novel, where novel has come to dominate the whole cultural scene. Novels are also now, as we know, adapted for the screen. So fiction has come to dominate, and therefore I believe that we have not been giving much required and desired attention towards our fiction, which is very rich in my opinion. Maybe it's also because the texts are longer and more demanding to translate, even though I believe that the poetic medium is more demanding than the prosaic medium. But still, keeping in view our socio-economic conditions of the translators and their location and their personal problems, you may say that still they are giving less attention to the translations of fiction than poetry, for example. But this is something that we need, and we need to discuss it at length, and we need to ponder over the question of the political economy of translations, and we need to relate it with the political economy of our literature also.
Okay. This brings another question into our discussion. I mean, what's our translation industry we have in Pakistan, and what kind of support it has, what publishing houses are doing, because as far as I know, there are no editorial services available for translators. Whatever a translator does if he or she translates something, it goes just as such. There is no peer review. There are not much rewards for the even writers, what to say of translators.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear from both of you about this. What's the state of translation industry in Pakistan, particularly with reference to literature,
It's
and
unfortunate.
that too in fiction?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. I mean, we are not supported. We are not supporting the state and its various institutions. They are not at all supportive to this translation industry, which, as we earlier discussed, can be a very good medium for putting our own cultural capital on the global map, cultural map of the world. This is just one kind of effect that we can achieve. For example, when I visited China a number of times, or Turkey, there I saw, and even I didn't go to Iran, but I know that Iran also is very particular in getting everything translated into their local languages. Whenever I entered some bookshop in Beijing or Xi'an or Shanghai or in Istanbul or in other cities of Turkey, for example, I was attracted to the titles of the book, and when I opened the books, they were all translated into their local languages. So it means that they are very particular. They are doing a lot of investment, and the state itself is doing a lot of investment in that because of the economic reasons. In this way, not only they are creating many jobs for the young people and for the translators, but also they are benefiting from the knowledge which is produced in other locations, in the more developed locations, you may say, of the world. We are totally absent. I mean, maybe I'm talking too much in absolutist terms, but let me say that we are absent. When I visited National Library of Turkey this summer, I in fact asked the librarian to take me to the Urdu section because they had sections on almost all languages of the world. And there I saw, some tafasir and some books of hadith in Urdu and so on. And just a few books that you could count on fingertips, they were there, of poetry, for example. But our huge, legacy, literary legacy, that has been absent, that is absent from there, from visibility.
So I would also ask to add another question to you related to this discussion. What's the role of editor in translation here in Pakistan, in general and here in Pakistan?
The role of the editor in a publishing house would be...
I mean, particularly in translations.
Yeah, I think editorial positions and the role of the editor, it's seminal. It's it's very vital in kind of making sure that a finished translation is true, or at least close to or loyal to the original work. And also, I think the role of the editor is also important in terms of ensuring that this transculturation process, the translation of not just the language, the text, but the cultural context takes place from that original culture to the foreign culture. So let's say a work of Fanon, for instance, or a work by Pamuk, how is it translated into Urdu? So the editor is that medium. He helps, or she helps mediate that transformation to take place. And then, in a publishing house, in the rest of the world, especially in the Western developed world, editorial positions are so important and they're so sought after. But since in Pakistan we don't have enough state support for publication houses, and the entire infrastructure and the around publishing works of fiction or any other writings I think editors over here would be scarce to find. And again, you know, it's I think it's like a two-tiered problem, that the states or the state institutions don't support our publishing processes, and we also don't have a demand for those books. We don't have enough of a reading culture in Pakistan, which I feel is, I noticed this difference between the Western world and Pakistan. I mean, generally we don't have a culture that encourages reading. We are more kind of hooked into the media and sensationalism. This is what we seek as a nation, I think. So whatever they're demanding, they demand soaps, they demand, you know, like for example, Turkish soaps are so popular over here, and that's also work of translation because they're dubbed into Urdu, and people love them. And recently, Korean soaps have also gained a lot of popularity. So that those are works of translation, but there are a certain type of stories that are being desired over here or consumed over here. But you know, when it comes to a text, a literal text, a literary text, or a work of knowledge, a body of knowledge, that's not so much in demand.
Well, it's another topic which demands another session of discussion. Now, Dr. Safir, I would ask you, what's your experience of translation when you were doing, I guess you translated Musassar Sartaret's Baha, Sorrows of Saraswati.
Sorrows of Saraswati.
So I would like to hear from you, what was your experience while you were translating?
Since that was my first experience of translation, along with one of my colleagues, Dr. Salim Khan, it was, I mean, I started it initially and it was commissioned to me by the Pakistan Academy of Letters, but then due to, you know, official so much commitments and occupations, I failed to complete it even after 3 years. Therefore, then we started working together on that translation. So that being the first experience posed so many difficulties to me. Perhaps the first difficulty was by virtue of the nature of the text itself. That is, Tarar's most demanding novel, in my opinion, is Baha. It is rooted so much back into history, Dravidian cultures, Dravidian history, pre-Aryan history, and to revive that history in language and you know, make it, give it a contemporary touch also for the contemporary readers. That must be demanding for the original writer even. But then it was doubly demanding for the translators. So, but since then, when I have started working on other translations also, from English to Urdu and then Urdu to English mostly, I feel at home now comparatively, but every text poses a different kind of challenge. The literary translations are more demanding, but sometimes, I have also translated some journalistic writings or some biographies like the one that I'm working on now, Kishwar Nahi's second autobiography. So that is now comparatively easy.
So apart from all these problems, there must be some pleasure of translation as well. That's why you keep on doing this work.
The pleasure is maybe in the achievement when you see it getting published and seeing it in the hard form. But before that, it's mostly labor. It becomes labor of love only after publication.
So Dr. Safir, thank you very much. It was very interesting discussion. And Dr. UZMA, you also raised very, very interesting questions, but we don't have much time to discuss those, maybe in some other session. Thank you very much for coming into our program. So viewers, thank you very much for watching us. I hope you might have enjoyed our discussion. See you next Sunday, same time. Thank you very much.